when we look at that sort of structure and that conversation with, I guess a more modern view on there being a lot of people involved in the conversation and not having one person to steer the ship into oblivion, having other people that can jump in and say, no, 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 that's not the case. You need to consider this. You need to consider that. I think it's about, I think historically we've seen, not just professionally, even politically, people are just generally ambivalent. And I think if you look at, even Veg, you were saying, people are starting caring now about not just this topic, but I think people are now just realizing with, climate change, with, what's going on with COVID, with, just any situation, people are now just becoming present and aware. And it's really crossing paths with this whole social media thing that I think we're going to be having a chat about in the coming weeks. People are now starting to care, but they're starting to bed down in camps. And just to pick up on what Veg just said, people think they're losing their businesses, et cetera, to save lives, but it was made clear from the beginning it was not to overwhelm the hospitals. Nobody's losing business to save lives. This is what's called a nuanced point of view from an American. I didn't know those existed until recently. But I really appreciate that there's people back home, Veg, that understand that it's not just about people losing businesses. I was going to ask you about this, Hugh, and just to finish up, it's because our healthcare system can't handle overload. And I've not heard many people back home, when I speak to them, necessarily understand that. I don't think that's necessarily a fault of anybody's. It's just not something people understand. I think in America, it's a nationalized healthcare system. No, sorry, it's a privatized healthcare system. It's the greatest in the world, and it's a good healthcare system in regards of people are lifespans are living just as long. People are getting the quality of care they need if they can afford it. I'm not going to get into the whole healthcare conversation. But I think it's just down to education. People don't necessarily understand what's at risk, and the messaging isn't there. You can only learn what, based on the information, and not everybody has the time to spend hours reading about the impacts of COVID-19 on the healthcare system. I would say the average person going into, as a teacher or insurance salesperson, I don't even know, average Joe is going to necessarily know about that.
And I don't think our news stations in the UK, even, I can't speak for the US, are doing a great job of trying to help that situation. So the people that don't have a lot of time and are then catching up with radio or bits of TV here and there, and it's just so sensationalized and over the top and dramatic and anxiety driven, depressing. I don't think I don't think they're doing a great job of highlighting it. They're trying to get engagement and trying to manipulate things either way to try and instigate comments and attention, rather than actually distributing what is actually happening on a factual, logical, sensible basis, and actually taking some responsibility as leaders to try and help us deal with this really difficult situation. As a society, they have, I think they could do a far better job at that. You're spot on. Lack of education is at the root of a lot of these issues, because people just don't understand.
Although I would challenge that a little bit, because I don't think it's necessarily the media's job to educate, it's to inform. And part of the free society we live in, there's this whole thing with media, giving truth to power. And the only entities, and I think, and I'm not a history professor, and I don't claim to know a lot, but I think media is one of those true last bastions of a free society in the UK and in the US, where leaders are put under the gauntlet to answer questions, and we make judgments on how they're handling issues based on how well they can run that gauntlet. And I think there's value in that still. And I think
there's value in media. I think they can do a better job. I don't think they do.
No doubt.
Handle it well.
Yeah.
And I think that actually informing is education. I think informing them of stats and informing them of realities of situation without getting carried away and going down certain paths which aren't necessarily kind of applicable, I think is part of education. It's not everything, and I don't believe, what I'm not saying is that they're solely responsible for it, but I think they can do a better job, and they are part of the process of education.
Yeah, but I think it also kind of doubles back to that. And this was one thing I did want to bring up with you. I did think about this because you were talking about that whole view that people should have some freedom to be able to, I guess, make a living and manage their lives. And if it means they need to keep their business open in difficult times, whether that's a bar or a restaurant or whatever the case may be, they should be allowed to do so. And people that are at risk, need to stay home, which I think we agree more or less that just staying home isn't necessarily going to stop people who are isolating from getting ill. Yeah. However, what it made me think about, it just raised the question with me, at what point is it acceptable for the government to, let's say, make a determination on a business? So surely we would all agree that if a restaurant was on the edge of a cliff and we could see that there was erosion and it was going to fall into the sea in the next year, we would have no problem with the government shutting it down to protect, ignorant patrons going in there and falling off of a cliff. And at what point does the situation with, let's say, COVID, for example, and closing a town down to protect people, where do those things come together, and where does personal freedom come into play?
Yeah, it's a very complicated topic, isn't it? And I've heard someone say that let's tackle this as a country as well, and in solidarity. I think that when you're locking down certain parts of the country and not others, they're again, one of the side effects to that is this disintegration again. Like, we want to try and be in all of this together. If there's a problem in society, let's try and tackle that. Another thing, we're behind. So whatever they're recording isn't the reality of today as well. So yeah, if we are going back to that, that's all, I don't know. And it's easy for me to say in my circumstances and my health and etc. I fear this less than a lot of people, but I prefer that we tackle it all together. We either have more freedoms together, or we lock down together, rather than this city's locked down, that city, you kind of do what you want. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think it's a healthy message either overall.